We are just about ready for the 2021 NHL Stanley Cup Final. So today we're going to preview the series and I'll give you my predictions. And that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're going to do a preview and prediction video for the NHL Stanley Cup Final between the Montreal Canadiens and the Tampa Bay Lightning, which gets underway this evening in Tampa. Of course, we had a long road to these playoffs. It's been an interesting, different season with a 56-game schedule. Obviously just regional play within our divisions. It's been a very unique season. I think we can all agree on that, and it's almost coming here to a close. We're going to have a very busy offseason. But first today, we're going to preview this final. We're going to take a look at stats for both these teams in the playoffs here so far. Take a look at how they got here, how they, what they had to do in other series to get to this point. We'll take a look at who their top scorers are, and I'll give you my thoughts on who I feel is going to win. So let's get started here first by taking a look at some team stats for each of these teams throughout these 21 Stanley Cup playoffs. Okay, so of course, as we know, both teams have won 12 games. That's what it takes to win 3 series to get to this point, but obviously they had a different number of games played to get here. The Habs have a 12-5 record, where the Lightning are 12-6. So obviously Tampa's had to play one extra game to get where they are, but really nothing major there. Looking at goals for and against, the Habs have scored 43 goals so far, and the Lightning have scored 58. So that gives the Habs a 2.53 average per game, and the Lightning a 3.22 average per game. Clearly, Tampa's a little bit more offensively explosive. I don't think anybody would be shocked to find out that statistic. Now, on the other side of the puck here, on the goals against side of things, we have the Habs giving up 37 goals against and the Lightning giving up 37 goals against, but Tampa's actually played one more game, so it's slightly more impressive. The Habs have given up an average of 2.18 goals per game, and the Lightning have 2.06 goals per game. So the Lightning also have a slight edge in that regard, but I think we all know in Montreal side of things, their defensive play has been a huge part of why they are where they are. Clearly, they're not as offensively gifted as the Lightning are. We can see that they haven't scored as many goals. Pretty obvious in that regard, but still, defensively, very comparable teams. Now, on special teams, the Habs have had a pretty decent power play of 20.9%, but even though that's a good success rate, it's only 7th best in the playoffs, whereas the Lightning have been lights out, 37.7%, and it's hard to imagine that's only 2nd best, but the Lightning, I tell you, that's one dangerous power play. The Habs are going to absolutely have to stay disciplined and stay out of that box, or they're going to be in trouble. As good as they are defensively, you take away a man, and that PK, it can only go so far before it gets worn out here. But the PK, as we just mentioned, has been the Habs' biggest strength. They're number 1 in the NHL playoffs with a success rate of 93.5. I've lost track of how many penalties they've killed off in a row. I tried to find the stat online. I know it was at least 30. It might be slightly more than that now. Consecutive penalties that they've been able to kill off. So that's a streak they're going to want to be able to continue, but at the same time, they're going to want to really limit the chances Tampa gets. So that is going to be a major test for a really good PK so far. The Lightning's PK, no slouch either at 83%. Normally, 83 would be really, really good. It's 4th best in the playoffs, and hard to imagine there's such a gap there between the two, because in the regular season, you would be ecstatic to have a PK that good. Now, taking a quick look at face-offs, the Habs have been doing relatively well at 49.2%. And then the Lightning are 47.7%. So the Habs seem to be winning more faceoffs. They're a little stronger on the PK. Defensively speaking, they're pretty even, and the Lightning certainly have an advantage when it comes to the offensive side of the game. So overall, it should be a pretty good matchup. I don't think this is going to be a short series, and I guess we'll find out here shortly. Now, we're going to now take a look at the next segment, which we're going to say, how did they get here? So we're going to take a quick look at what each team has had to do to get where they are, how many games did they play, who did they beat out, and then we'll take a look at their top scorers. How did each team get here? Looking at the Montreal Canadiens, well, they started off digging themselves a hole against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They were down 3-1, and they managed to make a comeback, which is something that's rare and you don't see a lot in a 7-game series. Came back, won 3 straight to pick up a 4-3 series victory. That was probably their toughest series in a sense when it comes to obviously having to go 7 games and obviously getting themselves in a big hole. But certainly the other series were not easy either. Then they went on to sweep the Winnipeg Jets 4-0. So that gave them some extra breathing room, which is why they have a little bit less of games played here than the Lightning. And then, of course, they just came off a very hard-fought 4-2 series victory over the Vegas Golden Knights. But again, Vegas, an extremely offensively gifted team, one of the top teams in the NHL's regular season, and Montreal's defense proved to be too good for them and shut them down. And of course, Price won another goalie battle. So again, that's how the Habs have gotten to be where they are. On the Lightning side of it, they defeated the Florida Panthers with a 4-2 series victory. So obviously that was nice to see the Battle of Florida for the first time. We thought it was going to go 7, but the Panthers came up a little bit short to push it that way, but they had a good test early on. Of course, round 2, they went through Carolina a little bit easier at 4-1 than I thought they would, to be honest. I really thought Carolina was going to go a little further, and I even thought they could win that series, but Carolina just didn't have their best. The Lightning did, and it was all over. And then against the Islanders, of course, we had a hard-fought 7-game series. They won Game 7 by a 1-0 score. So as much as the Lightning certainly prevailed and are going to get a chance to defend their championship that they won last year in the bubble, the Islanders were certainly their toughest test, and they were 1 goal away from being in a Stanley Cup final. So, to have a 1-goal, 1-0 Game 7 victory in Game 7, it's the slimmest of margins. You can't get much closer than that. So as much as the Lightning are here, it very easily could have been the Islanders, but they prevailed and came out and scored a big goal when they needed it. It was a Yanni Gourde shorthanded goal in Game 7, which is, an absolutely clutch performance. But that's what the Lightning seem to do. They have so many weapons on that team. They can be clutch when they need to be, and it can be a different guy just about any night of the week. Now let's take a look at their top scorers. So the Montreal Canadiens are led by Nick Suzuki with 13 points, where the Lightning are led by Kucherov at 27. A huge difference there. I mean, the Lightning's, all of their top 5 scorers have more than a Habs top scorer. So we have Kucherov at 27, Braden Point at 20. Of course, that goal streak was snapped one short of tying Reggie Leach for the all-time record for consecutive goals in playoff games. Alex Killorn and Steven Stamkos both have 17. And big defenseman Victor Hedman at 16, whereas the Habs have Suzuki at 13, Cole Caulfield and Corey Perry both have 9 points, and Eric Stahl and Yoel Armia with 8. And of course, Armia's not going to be in the lineup, at least for Game 1. We're waiting for further word. Of course, he's on the COVID protocol list, and we don't know, of course, due to privacy, all the reasons why. So was he positive? Was he in contact of somebody? We don't know that. So it's difficult to say exactly how long he's going to have to be in quarantine. We'll hopefully find out a little bit more here within the next day, I would hope. I mean, they don't really give a lot of information on this stuff sometimes. So clearly the Lightning have a more offensively talented team, which we already talked about. No big surprise there. But the other thing I will say about this is that the Lightning are also a banged up group. And if the Habs, who are known to have a big, strong, tough, big forward defense that have been wearing down other teams, like they wore down Stone and Pacioretty, they wore down Scheifele, Wheeler, Ehlers, Connor, those guys in Winnipeg. They wore down Matthews, Marner in Toronto. They can do it again. Stamkos is not 100%. When he was asked about his health earlier, he said he was good enough to play. Didn't want to put a percentage on it, but he's not 100%. Nikita Kucherov obviously left very, very early in Game 6 against the Islanders after taking a shot from Scott Mayfield, which looked like a cross-check to the ribs. But when asked about it after the series, Kucherov said there was no injury. I have no idea what you're talking about. There's no way that I was ever in doubt to not play Game 7. I'm like, okay, you just don't want to talk about it. That's complete lies. You wouldn't have missed 3/4 of Game 6 if you weren't injured. I mean, come on. Yes, the Lightning are a deep team, but they're not going to be like, oh yeah, Nikita, why don't you go just sit in the back? We're good here. I mean, it was a tight game, which they ended up losing. So clearly that was not part of the plan. He's definitely hurt. To what extent, we don't know, because nobody wants to talk about it, of course. And we know that Victor Hedman has not been 100% for a while. He came into the playoffs not at 100%. And obviously, if any of those guys, get any kind of more severely injured and have to miss time, it's going to be a big blow. Thankfully, though, like I said, they are a deep team. They can withstand that. But you can only take so many players being out or so many injuries before it starts to have a major impact on them. Clearly, right now, Kucherov has the most points, but Braden Point's been the engine for that team, in my opinion, leading them, scoring the most goals, and really, at this point, he probably would get my vote for the Conn Smythe if they were to go on and win the Stanley Cup. Now, looking at the goaltending statistics here as well, we've got Carey Price with a 12-5 record. Vasilevsky 12-6, obviously the same as the team. Both goalies have played every game and every minute except for any time they might have been pulled for an extra attacker or something. Other than that, they've been in there. Their backups have not seen the ice so far in this playoffs. Price is a .934 save percentage, whereas Vasilevsky's .936, so you can't get much tighter than that. Price has a .202 goals against, and Vasilevsky a .199. Vasilevsky's got 4 shutouts, though, to Carey Price's 1. So Montreal, typically, like this, I can't remember the stat right now, but I know when they score more than 2 goals or 2 goals or more, they have an extremely high success rate because obviously they've been very, very stingy. Like there's been a couple of games where Price has given up 3 or 4 and they haven't been able to get there. Like Montreal has to have a really good defensive game and a solid outing from Price, which they've had majority of the time. Obviously they wouldn't be where they are without it because they haven't been able to have that higher offensive output. So if the Lightning can manage to either get that point where they're hitting 3 goals a game like they have been a lot in those playoffs, it's going to be really difficult for Montreal to be able to keep up. But it's really going to, the big question is, can their top 4D, who shut down all these top players so far in these playoffs, continue to do so with the Lightning? And now, of course, because you have top 4 in Montreal that's playing well enough to handle that, obviously you get 2 pairs. The third pair guys never play together as well. When you got guys like John Merrill and Gustafsson or Romanov when he's been in there, they do not play them as a third pair. They rotate them through the other 2 pairs, and they give those guys a shift off here and there to get them some extra minutes. So certainly, there's always one of those top 4 guys out there on the ice. But the problem with the Lightning that you could say is even more than the other teams is they have even more weapons. Like they can even get more offensive output from their third line. Whereas teams like Toronto had a lot of offensive firepower in their top line, maybe their second line normally, but Tavares wasn't there for the bulk of the series, so that didn't help. In the Jets series, they had Scheifele obviously get suspended, so that took away a weapon for them. And I'm not making an excuse to say Montreal won because of injuries or suspensions. That's not it, but it did make things a little bit easier. There's no doubt about it. You take away a top player, it certainly changes your matchups, it changes your lineups and all of that. I think Montreal would have won anyways, especially in Winnipeg, no doubt. Toronto, likely as well. I don't think it would have made all the difference, but it's certainly, it's just a different animal when you go to Tampa, who they don't have that right now. So like I said, if anybody there gets hurt and they lose a Stamkos or Kucherov or something, or even more importantly, Victor Hedman, you take Hedman off that blue line, that's a different team back there. He's such a rangy guy. He's not even really a defenseman. He's like a rover that covers such a big part of the ice out there. So, it's a whole different beast. So to me, if Tampa stays healthy, theoretically, I understand why all the betting agencies have them down as the heavy favorites. But Montreal has been underdogs this entire series. I guess my only concern for the Habs is quite often, it's happened a lot, that when you see an underdog team like Montreal, who's been the lower ranked team, people not picking them to win pretty much the whole way through, and when they get to the final, it's even harder to overcome that last one and get the cup. Like look at like Predators, for example, when they went through, they were I believe they were an 8th seed, got all the way to the finals, lost out, But we've seen 8th seed teams also win the cup before, like the LA Kings did it. So it doesn't really mean that it's a foregone conclusion that they're finally going to succumb here to the Lightning and they're going to have their second consecutive Stanley Cup. It couldn't happen, sure, but I'm not really in a position here where I can bet on it. Personally, I think it'd be huge for Canada to see the Habs win. I've been saying for the last few years, Canada needs the Stanley Cup. It's been a long time coming. The Habs were the last team to do it in 1993. We've had a number of times that a team has made it to the finals since then. Like the Flames, the Oilers, and the Senators went in consecutive years and all lost. And then the Canucks went in 2011 and lost in Game 7. So a lot of them have been really close, but here we are for the first time, in a decade. So we'll see what Montreal can do. To be honest, when it comes to making a prediction here, my head says Tampa, my heart says Montreal. I always cheer for a good underdog story regardless. Obviously, I'm not a hardcore fan of either team. I'm pretty neutral in this series. But like I said, being Canadian, it's a story I'd like to see completed. Tampa got a cup last year. So obviously I want to see some guys like Weber and Price. It'd be huge for them to get a cup. Their resume. They've had awesome careers. It's the one thing that's missing. So it's really difficult to say, but I will say this, when it comes to predictions, I will be surprised if this series ends in less than 6 games. If you look at all the stats that we just just went through, I really think it's going to be a really close series. I think Montreal can at least limit the Lightning offense. I don't know that they can completely shut them down enough to win, but they're going to limit them as much or more than their other opponents. Like, if you look at the Habs and the way they've been playing, they're built and constructed similarly to what the Islanders are. They're not exactly the same, but they're certainly, similar enough in the style. And a lot of people like to say, at least how they're playing. Doesn't mean that you look at the rosters on paper, it's one thing, but how they're actually executing right now, you could almost make the statement here that they're executing even just a little bit better defensively. And look how close the Islanders were. So if the Habs can be a little better defensively than the Islanders, then theoretically they stand a good chance to win, in my opinion. So I really think that the Habs can win this possibly as 6 or 7 games, but I won't be shocked if we get a 7-game series and it's kind of a toss-up. It's a really tightly contested matchup. You get Pat Maroon going for his 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup. Of course, he won one with St. Louis, then with Tampa, going for number 2 with Tampa. Certainly lots of good stories, lots of good players on both sides, and I want to know what your thoughts and predictions are down below. Leave a comment down below. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.